If you love emotional rescue stories filled with mystery, loyalty, and second chances, you're in the right place. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a powerful story like this one. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if hope knocked on your door in the middle of a storm? The rain had not stopped for 2 days. It hammered against the small wooden cabin at the edge of Blackridge Mountain, as if the sky itself was trying to break through the roof. 48 hours earlier, 5-year-old Lily Carter had disappeared into the forest behind the cabin. Since then, the world had narrowed to mud, sirens, flashlights, and silence. Her father, Daniel Carter, stood by the window staring into the darkness. He had once commanded men in places where fear was a constant companion, but nothing had prepared him for this. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his once dark hair now threaded with gray at the temples. A faded military tag hung from a chain around his neck beside his late wife Emma's wedding ring. He held both so tightly that the metal pressed into his palm. The sheriff's voice had just crackled through the old kitchen radio. Search operations suspended until dawn. Risk of mudslides too high. Teams pulling out. The words replayed in Daniel's mind like a cruel echo. Pulling out. Standing down. Waiting for morning. He couldn't wait. The forest outside was thick and merciless. The rain had turned the slopes into rivers of mud. If Lily was out there alone, cold and hurt, every minute mattered. Daniel closed his eyes and pressed the ring to his lips. "Hold on, baby," he whispered into the storm. That was when he heard it. Tap. 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 At first he thought it was a branch, but the rhythm was deliberate. Controlled. Almost patient. He looked up. On the porch, soaked to the bone, stood a young gray and white German shepherd. The dog's fur clung to its lean body, water dripping from its muzzle. Lightning flashed, illuminating intelligent amber eyes fixed directly on Daniel. The dog raised one paw and tapped the glass again. Then it turned its head and looked toward the forest. Back at Daniel. Forest. Daniel's pulse quickened. He opened the door. Cold rain slapped his face instantly. "Where did you come from?" he muttered. The dog didn't bark. It didn't whine. It simply stepped backward off the porch and waited. "You know something," Daniel said, more to himself than to the animal. The dog turned and trotted toward the trees. Daniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed his heavy flashlight, slid his survival knife into its sheath, and followed the animal into the storm. The forest swallowed them whole. Branches whipped against Daniel's shoulders. Mud sucked at his boots. Rain blurred the beam of his flashlight into a pale tunnel through darkness. Ahead, the dog moved with determination, nose low, weaving through rocks and roots with practiced ease. Every few minutes it stopped and looked back to make sure Daniel was still following. "I'm here," Daniel breathed, pushing harder. The climb was brutal. Twice he slipped and nearly went down the slope. Once a small river of mud rushed past only yards away, reminding him how unstable the ground had become. After nearly an hour, the dog veered sharply to the left and descended a steep incline toward a clearing Daniel hadn't seen in years. At the bottom stood the skeletal remains of the old Blackridge sawmill, abandoned decades ago. Broken beams jutted into the night like ribs of a dead beast. Vines strangled the rotting wood. The place felt haunted. The dog slowed. Daniel swept his flashlight across the clearing. And then he saw it. A small yellow mitten caught on a thorn bush. His heart stopped. "Lily," he whispered. He stumbled forward, dropping to his knees in the mud. It was hers. He would recognize it anywhere. Emma had knitted it the winter before she passed. "She was here," Daniel said, voice shaking. A blinding white light suddenly exploded in his face. "Don't move!" The command cut through the rain like a blade. Daniel froze instinctively, hands rising slowly. He recognized the metallic sound of a rifle being adjusted. "Hands where I can see them. I'm not armed," Daniel said calmly. "My daughter is missing. I found her glove." There was a pause. Then another voice from the shadows. "Lower the light." The beam shifted, no longer aimed at his eyes but at his chest. It caught the glint of his dog tag and the wedding ring. The dog trotted forward without fear and wagged its tail at the unseen men. "You know this animal?" Daniel asked cautiously. A figure stepped out from behind a collapsed beam, a tall man with a thick beard and steady posture. "Name's Marcus," the man said. "And, yeah, that's Ranger." "Ranger? He wandered into our camp months ago. We took him in." "Our camp?" Another man appeared beside Marcus, lowering his rifle fully. "You're not supposed to be here." "My daughter is," Daniel said, 5 years old. Blonde hair, pink jacket. The two men exchanged a look. Marcus exhaled slowly. "You better come with us." They led Daniel past the ruined mill toward what appeared to be a solid rock wall. Marcus pushed aside a curtain of thick ivy, revealing a narrow crevice hidden behind foliage. Daniel followed them through. On the other side was something he never expected, a sheltered basin carved into the mountain, hidden from view. Canvas tents arranged neatly, smokeless fire pits glowing softly. Supplies stacked with military precision. It wasn't chaos. It was organized, intentional. A hidden refuge. Several men looked up as Daniel entered. Most were middle-aged, some bore visible scars. All carried a quiet intensity in their eyes. From the largest tent stepped an older man with sharp features and calm authority. "I'm Grant," he said. "You're Daniel Carter." Daniel stiffened. "How do you know that?" "Your daughter told us." The world tilted. "Where is she?" Daniel demanded. Grant held up a steady hand. "She's safe." Twisted her ankle near the ravine. "Our medic said it." "She's scared, but she's strong." Daniel felt his knees weaken. "She's here," he whispered. Grant nodded toward a tent marked with a faded red cross. Daniel didn't wait. He rushed forward, pushing aside the canvas flap. Inside, lit by lantern light, sat Lily wrapped in blankets. Her small ankle was splinted carefully, her tear-streaked face lifted. "Daddy!" Daniel crossed the space in 2 strides and dropped to his knees, pulling her into his arms. He buried his face in her hair, trembling. "I thought you'd never find me," she whispered. "I will always find you," he replied. Ranger curled up beside them, resting his head on Lily's blanket. After a long while, Daniel looked up at the medic, a lean man with wire-rimmed glasses. "Thank you," the man nodded. "She's tough." Later, outside under the canvas awning, Grant explained everything. They were veterans, men who had served and returned carrying invisible wounds. They had built this hidden sanctuary away from the noise of the world. "We don't want attention," Grant said. "We help when we can, but we stay off the map." "How did she end up here?" Daniel asked. Grant's expression softened. "She told us she was chasing a glowing moth. Said she wanted to send a message to her mom in heaven." Daniel closed his eyes. Emma had loved moths. Used to tell Lily they carried secrets between worlds. "She slipped near the ravine," Grant continued. Ranger found her first. She shared her snack with him. Wouldn't stop hugging him. Daniel looked over at the dog lying protectively near the tent entrance. "He came to get me," Daniel said quietly. Grant nodded. "He's never left the basin before tonight." "Guess he decided she needed you more." Morning eventually broke through thinning clouds. Grant pulled Daniel aside. "When you go back, tell the sheriff you found her near the mill. Leave this place out of it." Daniel understood immediately. "I won't say a word." They shook hands, sealing an unspoken bond. As Daniel prepared to leave with Lily in his arms, Ranger stood between the camp and the rocky exit. He looked back at the men who had sheltered him, then at Lily. Grant knelt and scratched behind Ranger's ears. "Soldier chooses his post," he murmured. "Looks like yours is with them." Ranger walked to Daniel's side and stayed there. Days later, the storm was nothing but memory. Back at the cabin, sunlight filtered through tall pines. Lily rested on the couch, ankle healing. Ranger lay beside her, eyes half closed as she stroked his fur. Daniel stood on the porch, breathing in crisp mountain air. He had faced enemies across oceans, but nothing compared to nearly losing his child. He looked through the window at his daughter laughing softly with the dog who had refused to let her disappear. Sometimes miracles didn't fall from the sky. Sometimes they scratched at your door in the rain and waited for you to believe. And somewhere deep in the mountains, a hidden brotherhood kept their silent watch. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable journeys. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever experienced a moment when hope came from the most unexpected place? And before you leave, check out the next story on your screen for another powerful tale of loyalty and courage. The official report said Lily had been found in a shallow rock hollow near the abandoned mill. Sheriff Dalton accepted Daniel's explanation without much resistance. The storm had been violent, the terrain unstable. A child could easily slip, crawl somewhere for shelter, and go unnoticed in the chaos. But Whispering Pines was a small town, and small towns survived on questions. By the third day after Lily returned home, the rumors had started. Some said Daniel never stopped searching even when the rescue teams gave up. Others claimed they saw strange lights near the old mill that night. A few insisted the mountain itself protected the child. Daniel ignored all of it. His focus was Lily. Her ankle would take weeks to fully heal. The doctor in town fitted her with a small brace and strict instructions to rest. Lily obeyed for exactly 10 minutes. By the end of the week, she had claimed the couch as her castle, rangers stationed loyally at its base like a sworn knight. The bond between them deepened by the hour. Ranger never left her side. If Lily shifted, he lifted his head. If she laughed, his tail thumped against the cushions. If she whimpered in her sleep, he pressed closer, as if absorbing whatever shadow haunted her dreams. Daniel noticed something else too. The dog watched the woods, not casually, not lazily, intently. Every morning, Ranger would sit on the porch facing the tree line, ears alert, body still. It wasn't fear. It was vigilance, like he expected something to come back out. One evening, a week after the rescue, Daniel was stacking firewood when Sheriff Dalton's truck rolled into the driveway. Daniel wiped his hands and walked over. Dalton stepped out slowly. He was in his late 50s, thick mustache, eyes sharp despite the casual stance. "Evening," Dalton said. "Sheriff, how's Lily? Healing?" Dalton nodded but didn't smile. "Mind if I ask you something?" Daniel leaned against the truck bed. "Go ahead." Dalton lowered his voice. "Search team went back up there yesterday, around the mill." Daniel's pulse remained steady, but his mind sharpened. "And? We found tracks," Dalton said, "multiple sets. Boot prints. Organized movement." "Not ours." Daniel shrugged lightly. "Hunters? Maybe." Dalton studied him carefully. "But they weren't scattered. They moved like a unit." Daniel met his gaze evenly. "You think I ran into someone?" Dalton hesitated. "Did you?" There it was. Daniel remembered the handshake under canvas, the silent oath, the men who chose isolation over exposure, the medic who set his daughter's ankle with steady hands. "No," Daniel said firmly. "I followed Ranger. Found her glove. Found her in the hollow." Dalton watched him for several seconds. Finally, he sighed. "All right, just covering bases. If there are folks camping illegally up there, I need to know." Daniel nodded. "Of course." Dalton got back in his truck, but before driving off he added, "You're lucky that dog showed up." Daniel glanced at Ranger sitting on the porch beside Lily. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I am." That night, long after Lily fell asleep, Daniel stepped outside alone. The forest was calm now. No rain. No thunder. Just wind brushing through the trees. "You can come out," Daniel said softly. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a figure stepped from the shadows near the tree line. Marcus. He looked different, without a rifle slung across his chest. More human. Less guarded. "You shouldn't be here," Daniel said quietly. Marcus gave a faint smirk. "Relax. I didn't bring the whole army." Daniel crossed his arms. "Sheriff's been sniffing around." "We know," Marcus replied. "That's why I'm here." Ranger had risen silently and now stood between them. He recognized Marcus immediately but didn't wag his tail this time. He simply observed. "We don't want trouble," Marcus said. "But someone's been asking about the old mill, not just the sheriff." Daniel's expression hardened. "Who?" "Developers," Marcus replied. "Logging company from out of state. They've been surveying land quietly. If they clear that area," Daniel understood instantly, "they would find the crevice, the basin, the sanctuary." "How soon?" Daniel asked. "Sooner than we'd like." A heavy silence fell between them. "Why tell me?" Daniel finally asked. Marcus glanced at Ranger, then at the house where Lily slept. "Because you owe us," he said simply. "And because you're one of us, whether you hide in a cabin or a canyon." Daniel didn't answer right away. He had left the military to escape conflict, to build something quiet for Lily after Emma passed. But conflict had found him anyway. "What do you need?" Daniel asked. Marcus exhaled. "Information. If you hear anything official. Town meetings. Permits. We can't show our faces." Daniel nodded slowly. "All right." Marcus turned to leave, then paused. "And Daniel?" "Yeah?" Ranger chose well. He disappeared back into the trees. Inside the house, Daniel stood by Lily's bed later that night. She stirred slightly. "Daddy? I'm here." "Ranger won't let the bad things come back, right?" Daniel brushed her hair gently from her forehead. "No," he said softly. "He won't." But Daniel knew this wasn't about wild animals or storms anymore. A week later, a notice appeared on the bulletin board outside the general store. Public Land Development Discussion, Town Hall, Friday, 7 p.m. Daniel stared at it for a long time. The logging company's name was printed clearly beneath the heading, Blackridge Timber Corporation. That Friday, the town hall was packed. Men in pressed shirts with polished smiles stood near a projector displaying clean diagrams of economic growth and job opportunities. At the front was a representative named Howard Pierce. He spoke confidently about revitalizing unused land, clearing hazardous structures like the abandoned mill, creating safe recreational trails. Daniel listened from the back. Every word felt like a blade aimed at the hidden basin. Questions came from townspeople. Jobs? Safety? Environmental impact? Pierce answered smoothly. Then someone asked, "What about the wildlife disruption?" Pierce smiled. "Our surveys show minimal long-term impact." Daniel felt a flicker of anger. Minimal impact. He raised his hand. Pierce nodded politely. "Yes, sir?" "You've surveyed the entire area?" Daniel asked calmly. "Extensively," Pierce replied. Daniel held his gaze. "Even the ravines behind the old mill?" A flicker of something passed through Pierce's eyes. Recognition. "Yes," Pierce said evenly. "Why do you ask?" Daniel leaned back slightly. "Just making sure you're thorough." The meeting ended with applause from some, unease from others. Outside, neighbors clustered in small groups discussing opportunity. Daniel walked home under a darkening sky, Ranger trotting beside him. By the time they reached the cabin, Daniel had made a decision. He couldn't let the sanctuary be exposed. The next morning he drove into town and visited an old contact, retired Colonel Hayes. Hayes had once commanded Daniel's unit overseas. Now he ran a small hardware store quietly at the edge of town. Hayes listened carefully as Daniel explained everything without giving precise location details. When he finished, Hayes leaned back in his chair. "You're telling me a group of veterans built a hidden refuge in those mountains?" "Yes." "And now a corporation wants to level it?" "Yes." Hayes studied him for a long moment. "You planning to defend it?" Daniel hesitated. "I don't want to fight," he said. "But I won't let them bulldoze men who just want peace." Hayes nodded slowly. "Then don't fight," the colonel said. "Outmaneuver." Daniel leaned forward. "How?" Hayes's eyes sharpened. "You don't protect a place by standing in front of it," he said. "You protect it by making it untouchable." Daniel frowned. "Meaning?" "Environmental protection," Hayes said. "Historical preservation. If that land gains protected status, no company touches it." Daniel's mind raced. Protected land meant surveys, inspections. Risky. But legal protection was stronger than secrecy. "Can it be done quietly?" Daniel asked. Hayes smiled faintly. "With the right documentation." That night, Daniel returned to the forest edge. Marcus appeared again, as if he had been waiting. Daniel explained the idea. Marcus was skeptical at first. "You bring attention, we're exposed." "Not if it's done right," Daniel said. "The mill itself qualifies as a historical site. And the ravines, rare moth species documented in this region." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You're thinking leverage." "I'm thinking shield." After a long silence, Marcus nodded once. "Bring Grant into it," he said. He'll decide. As Marcus disappeared again into the woods, Daniel looked down at Ranger. "You started this," he murmured. Ranger simply watched the dark trees, steady and unblinking. The storm had passed. But something bigger was gathering. And this time, it wouldn't be rain they were fighting. It would be exposure. And Daniel knew one thing for certain. He wasn't walking into it alone. The meeting with Grant happened 3 nights later. Daniel followed Marcus through the hidden crevice once more, the familiar hush of the sheltered basin wrapping around him like a secret the world wasn't meant to know. The fires burned low and controlled. The tents were arranged with the same quiet precision. Nothing about the place felt reckless or temporary. Grant stood near the central fire pit, arms folded, eyes reflecting flame. "You're asking us to step into the light," Grant said after Daniel finished explaining the environmental protection plan. "I'm asking you to survive," Daniel replied. A few of the veterans shifted uneasily. For years, this basin had been their shield against memories, noise, crowds, judgment. Exposure wasn't just inconvenient. It was terrifying. "You think paperwork protects us from bulldozers?" one of the men muttered. "No," Daniel said calmly. "Documentation does. History does. Federal regulations do." Grant studied him carefully. "And what happens when officials want to inspect every inch of the land?" Daniel held his gaze. "Then we make sure what they see is worth protecting." Silence fell. Marcus finally spoke. "We don't have to reveal the camp. The protection status can apply to the outer perimeter, the mill ruins, the ravine system, wildlife habitats." Grant looked around at the men who had built this place with their hands. "We swore to defend each other," he said quietly, "not hide forever." It wasn't a loud declaration, but it shifted the air. After a long pause, Grant nodded once. "We try it your way." The next 2 weeks were a careful operation. Daniel worked through Colonel Hayes, who quietly contacted an environmental attorney he trusted. The abandoned mill, it turned out, qualified as a late 19th century industrial structure. There were records, blueprints, historical logs. Even more promising, rare Luna moth populations had indeed been documented in the region. Their breeding grounds often went undisturbed in deep ravines with stable limestone formations. The same ravines that shielded the Veterans Basin. If the area were designated a protected ecological and historical site, Blackridge Timber Corporation would face years of legal obstacles. But Pierce wasn't idle. Construction surveyors appeared at the base of the mountain sooner than expected. Heavy vehicles idled along dirt access roads. Stakes marked trees in bright orange ribbons. Daniel watched from his porch as Ranger stood rigid beside him. "They're moving fast," Daniel murmured. 2 days later, Lily tugged at Daniel's sleeve while he sorted documents at the kitchen table. "Daddy, are they going to cut down Ranger's Mountain?" The innocence in her voice struck him harder than any confrontation. "No," Daniel said firmly, "they're not." That night, Marcus arrived again. "They brought drilling equipment," he said. "They're testing soil near the eastern ridge." "That's too close," Daniel replied. Grant had already begun relocating sensitive supplies deeper within the basin. Contingency plans were in motion. Quiet evacuation routes mapped, nothing left to chance. But Daniel knew something else. Pierce was confident. Too confident. So Daniel decided to confront him directly. He drove to the temporary corporate trailer set up near the logging access road. Ranger remained in the truck, watching intently through the window. Pierce greeted Daniel with a professional smile. "Mr. Fractional." "Carter, what can I do for you?" Daniel stepped inside, closing the trailer door behind him. "You're accelerating your timeline," Daniel said. Pierce adjusted his cufflinks. "Opportunity doesn't wait. That land qualifies for protection," Daniel replied. "Historical and environmental." Pierce's smile thinned. "We've reviewed all public records. Nothing binding. Yet." Pierce leaned forward slightly. "Let me be candid. We've invested significant capital into this project. Jobs. Infrastructure. Growth for your town." "And what about what's already there?" Daniel asked quietly. Pierce's eyes sharpened. "Abandoned wood and insects?" Daniel didn't flinch. "History. Habitat. And people." That last word lingered in the air. Pierce tilted his head. People? Daniel held his gaze but said nothing more. A subtle shift occurred in Pierce's expression. He knew. Not details, not location, but enough. You should be careful what you imply, Pierce said softly. Or what you disturb, Daniel replied. When Daniel stepped back outside, Ranger let out a low growl toward the trailer. They're not backing down, Daniel said quietly to the dog. 3 days later, the official petition for protected status was filed. News spread quickly. Local reporters picked up the story. Historical societies expressed interest. Environmental groups began asking questions. Pierce responded publicly with frustration, claiming obstruction of economic progress. But something unexpected happened. Town sentiment shifted. Older residents remembered the mill's legacy. Families who valued the mountains began voicing concern about clear-cutting entire ridges. The issue was no longer about hidden veterans. It was about identity. One evening, Sheriff Dalton knocked on Daniel's door again. "You start a war I don't know about?" Dalton asked, half amused. Daniel poured him coffee. "Trying to prevent one." Dalton studied the petition papers on the table. "You really think there's something worth protecting up there?" Daniel met his eyes steadily. "I know there is." Dalton leaned back in his chair. "You realize if federal inspectors come out, they'll comb through everything." "I do. And if they find something off-grid?" Daniel hesitated only briefly. "Then maybe they'll find men who served this country and chose peace." Dalton held his gaze for a long moment. Finally, he nodded once. "I'll make sure inspections stay focused on what's relevant." It wasn't a promise of full protection, but it was understanding. Weeks passed in tense anticipation. Survey work halted pending review. Blackridge Timber Corporation issued formal objections. Environmental specialists arrived to evaluate moth populations and ravine ecosystems. Daniel accompanied them partway up the marked trails, careful to keep them well outside the hidden crevice. Ranger walked silently at his side. One afternoon, as a biologist examined limestone formations, she looked around in quiet awe. "This ecosystem is remarkably undisturbed," she said. "It would be irresponsible to clear it." Daniel felt a flicker of hope ignite. Back in the basin, Grant and the others waited anxiously for updates. They had contingency plans if everything failed, but none of them wanted to abandon the only place that had felt safe in years. Then, nearly 2 months after the storm that started everything, the decision came. Preliminary protection status granted. Full historical and ecological review pending. All logging operations suspended indefinitely. Daniel read the notice twice to be certain. Then he drove straight to the mountain's edge. Marcus met him halfway through the trees. "Well?" Marcus asked. Daniel allowed himself a rare smile. "They're suspended." Marcus exhaled slowly, tension draining from his shoulders. When Daniel stepped into the basin, the news spread like quiet wildfire. No cheers. No shouting. Just relief. Grant approached him, extending his hand. "You didn't defend this place with rifles," Grant said. "You defended it with strategy." Daniel shook his hand firmly. "You taught me that." Grant glanced at Ranger, who stood between them, tail steady. "He started it," Grant said. Months later, autumn returned. But this time, the rain was gentle. Lily's ankle had healed completely. She ran across the yard laughing as Ranger chased her in wide loops, careful never to knock her over. Daniel stood on the porch once more, hands resting on the railing. The mountain remained untouched, protected not by secrecy alone, but by recognition. Sometimes survival meant fighting. Other times, it meant being seen. The veterans remained in their hidden basin, still private, still careful, but no longer on the verge of being erased. Sheriff Dalton stopped by occasionally, always respecting the boundaries he never officially acknowledged. Pierce and Blackridge Timber quietly redirected their investments elsewhere. And Ranger? He never left Lily's side. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridges, Lily looked up at her father. "Daddy, do you think Mommy sent Ranger?" Daniel knelt beside her, brushing dirt from her cheek. "I think," he said softly, "sometimes love finds a way to guide us home." Ranger leaned against Lily's leg, eyes calm, watchful as ever. Daniel looked toward the distant peaks, knowing somewhere beyond sight, a silent brotherhood kept their fires burning low. The storm that once threatened to take everything had instead revealed something stronger: loyalty, courage, and the power of standing together without being seen. And if this final chapter reminded you that hope can arrive on four paws, that strength doesn't always roar, and that some heroes choose quiet lives, make sure you like this story and share it with someone who believes in loyalty. Subscribe for more journeys that prove we are never truly alone. And before you go, tell us in the comments, have you ever protected something precious without anyone knowing? Until next time, may you always find your way home.